welcome back to another episode of the Globe Interview Series. I'm your host Sunlight, and today I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Yat Siu, Chairman and Co-Founder of Animoca Brands. So welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So let's dive right into things.
Sure.
The Globe mobile app is now live on the Apple App Store. Trade anytime, anywhere, with any asset as collateral. Stay connected with all your positions on the go. Globe, exchange everything, now even easier.
So the last time you were on the show, you said the core belief of Animoca Brands was to give people true digital property ownership rights.
Right, that's correct.
Yep. So what can people do with these rights?
Well, I mean, I think one of the benefits of true digital property rights is the ability that once you have actual ownership of these assets, you can have the freedom to transact, the freedom to trade, the freedom for other people to do business with those items and assets. So I think one of the core sort of ideas behind ownership is that the network effects can then build naturally on top of them. One of the famous examples in blockchain gaming is actually the relationship that YGG had with Axie Infinity. A lot of people start thinking about, oh, is this play to earn or play and earn? Actually, play to earn was possible because of digital ownership. It's not the other way around. Let me sort of explain this a bit. When you have the ownership of these Axies, it allowed YGG to basically build a business by renting out the Axies that they owned. And were then basically able to build a business around the rental of these Axies through some revenue share arrangement that was only possible because they owned the Axies. And then they created the play to earn at the time business model, which is now more like a play and earn. But the point being simply that this was required, it was only possible because you had ownership. And so I think the next thing that you can do with ownership is, for instance, you could give it to a lending protocol, or you could basically give it to someone who might sort of use it for a different kind of game. The point is that someone now can create a service for that experience. Basically, we think of this as interoperability, but it comes from the ability of actually having true digital property rights. And eventually this extends to everything, like digital fashion, for instance. Why should you not be able to use your digital fashion in every game that you play, for instance, as opposed to just in one game?
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So actually, funny you bring up digital fashion, because there was recently a Gucci event in the Sandbox, right? So
yes.
That's really showing how there's a true interest and use case for the Metaverse.
Right.
But firstly, what does the Metaverse actually mean to you? Because there are so many different understandings of it.
I mean, it goes to the first point. For us, the Metaverse starts with digital ownership. A lot of people sometimes describe the Metaverse as a way to experience it, which is like VR or AR, or maybe what Facebook's talking about in terms of meta and social communities. These are all elements, I think, that make up the experience of the Metaverse. But the foundation of this, the sort of big sort of social construct, starts with digital property rights. Because if you don't have the ability to own what you do online, then it doesn't have any meaning. You don't have an ability to build a history, a legacy, and a culture on something like that. So from our perspective, it begins with digital property rights.
Awesome. Yeah. So where do you see the future of the Metaverse?
Well, I mean, I think to us, there are 5+ billion people online. There's 3.4 billion people today who play games on a regular basis. And they all basically exist in these, what we call pre-metaverses, or sort of quasi-metaverses, without actually owning anything. And what you have to also understand is that for all the people who are in these digital platforms, whether it's Facebook or whether it's Instagram or whether it's your favorite game that you're playing, you're actually dropping valuable pieces of resources, which is data. That's the powerful thing there. But you don't own any of that. And they actually make a lot of money from you for this. But because you don't understand it, or because you don't know what it means, you willingly give it up. So the Metaverse, then why people will move to this, is that now you can actually have fair value for your time and attention and the data that comes from it. What makes data valuable isn't just the blocks of data in itself, it's what the data can make. Right? It's like, for instance, on Facebook, you analyze something about user behavior, not just based on your data, but based on the behavior of maybe similar profile people inside the network of Facebook. Or for instance, when you look at self-driving cars, it's not the activity of you driving the car, but the activity of many people driving the car collectively that basically give it that intelligence. That is the kind of value that we as end users provide to the platform, yet the platform doesn't pay us anything for that. Right? So from our perspective, once we realize that this value ought to be shared, we think everyone else will move into that space. Our prediction is that in the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to have hundreds of millions of people in that space. And then at that point, hopefully there's a form of escape velocity, and we will go towards the billions of users in a number of years. But obviously that is to be seen.
Awesome. So it's such an interesting point that people can kind of own back their and monetize off of their own data.
Yes, but monetizing data is really only one angle, right? So when you have ownership, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to make money from it. It just means that you have the right to make money from it. So, just like in the physical world, I guess as George Washington famously said, sort of freedom and property rights are intertwined. You can't have one without the other. What he really means there is that in order for us to have freedom, all kinds of freedom, we need to first have the freedom to own this stuff, then have the freedom to transact, I have the freedom to do business with you, I have the freedom to give it away, I have all these things that I can now do. In the digital world, actually, when you play a game, you own a skin in Fortnite, for instance, or you own, a gaming asset, you don't have the freedom to do anything. You can't give it to anyone else because it's not yours to give. So I think the underlying principle around this is that actually digital ownership also then enables digital freedom, not one that is locked into the platform. Right now, for instance, if you launch an app in the App Store, it's not your choice to launch the app. You have to seek permission from Apple. It's also entirely Apple's choice to remove you, for instance. They don't necessarily do this all the time, but we have seen, for instance, cases where they don't like you for whatever reason. They will just remove you based on their rules, which are arbitrary. When you have ownership, then you have the freedom to do business, and people have the freedom to continue to do business with you in different ways. So I think that's really the ethos of sort of the open metaverse and Web3, that freedom of ownership gives you the freedom to transact and to do many things.
That's amazing. Thank you. So I've seen online, everyone is asking you about, Animoca Capital, but, I know it's too early to say anything, so I'm not going to ask you about that. Yes. But what I want to know is, one of the core pillars of Animoca is investment. So are there any areas within Web3 that right now seem to be big areas of growth?
Well, we always focus everything in the areas of what we think affect digital property rights, which means, in our case, non-fungible tokens. Non-fungible tokens, either they add to the network effect or they aid in the distribution and discovery of this, for instance, in terms of reach. That's the macro. But I think what we're really excited about outside of gaming is also education. One area that we started to launch most recently through our acquisition of a company called TinyTap is to launch publisher NFTs. And what publisher NFTs is teachers who actually make learning content, which they're already monetizing, which other parents are paying for. And now you, as an owner of that NFT, have the ability to basically become a publisher for this and share in the value of what you just bought. Right? It's no different than if you were buying an app on the App Store, for instance. And then you can promote it and market it and hopefully make money from this. The thing is, if this teaching content, for instance, makes like $1,000 a year, then you, as the owner of this, the new owner of this, you probably would pay a sort of a multiple of that because it represents a kind of yield. Is it 5 times? Is it 10 times? Well, you don't know. But the point is that it's more than 1 time's rent, for instance. And most recently, we did an auction for 6 publisher NFTs from 6 teachers, and sold them for $230,000 US. Now, you divide that up over 6 teachers. That is essentially their annual salary. That is life-changing for them. And so I think this is an example that we're excited about, basically introducing NFTs to the world of education as well as what we're doing with gaming.
That's inspiring.
Thank you.
So you've had over 300 investments.
380.
380, wow.
Yes.
Through Animoca Brands. So could you tell us about what actually makes a successful project?
So to understand why Animoca invests the way that it doesn't do it necessarily only because it thinks that each project must have individual return. Of course, we hope and wish for that too. But we think of it as an ecosystem. So in other words, when we make an investment in a company, we don't just hope that the equity value goes up. We also want that, and really maybe that's a primary focus, that economic activity is generated and value in the ecosystem that we are in Web3, as well as our own ecosystem, actually creates lots of economic sort of activity and value. So an example might be when we first invested in OpenSea back in 2019, we weren't doing it because we were hoping it was worth billions of dollars. It was, we were very lucky that it ended up being worth what it was. But actually, we did it because we knew, or we hoped, that when we were selling our NFTs on the platform, or that people were building it there, it would facilitate the growth of an ecosystem that would basically be worth, generate millions of dollars of activity. And now it's billions of dollars of activity. That to us is, in fact, more valuable to what we're building and to our ecosystem as a whole. So that means that each one of the companies that we're investing in hopefully can contribute to a shared network effect. And so what we look for is for founders and businesses that believe in the same vision. Right? So we're generally philosophically against the idea of zero sum, for instance. We don't believe that the future is one where there is one winner. Right? If there was one, then we wouldn't make 380 investments and growing. Right? The whole point is to actually facilitate a healthy ecosystem, which means it needs to be more distributed. We talk about decentralization. Well, you can't really have decentralization when you have just one company, for instance. And it's not really very decentralized if you have, let's say, 5 big ones. So again, the hope is through our investment strategy and through sort of facilitating the growth, we'll have balance in the ecosystem, because there's going to be many of them that help facilitate an ecosystem in which we can be a happy participant.
Amazing. So let's talk about the ecosystem for a second. So onboarding non-crypto natives is quite a big narrative throughout the space right now.
Yes.
Yep. So how can you ensure that non-crypto natives can be onboarded easily?
Well, it's something that is sort of in the works. But for instance, if you look at what Sandbox is doing, what's impressive about what Sandbox is doing is that even though it is a crypto native experience, lots of brands, for instance, like Gucci, for instance, or HSBC or whichever, have basically built experiences and have onboarded basically through Sandbox, despite the fact that you need a crypto wallet, because they're excited about being in the metaverse and they understand what it means in terms of potential. Plus, it has the ability to generate sales. Right? Customers buy NFTs and so on, basically on the Sandbox. So that's one example, which is a very clear economic one. But then you have the entertainment one, which is sort of what Gamey does. So Gamey has onboarded over 2 million wallets. The majority, 2 million users, the majority of them have never had crypto before. And they did it basically through a wallet that basically is friendlier from an onboarding perspective. And if you download the app on the App Store, you can immediately try and play it out. It's called Arcade. And you will see a very elegant user experience where the player himself does learn about the experience, but doesn't have to go through the process of the seed phrases and so on. But eventually, if they want to move their assets somewhere else, they can do so later on. So that's another approach, for instance, that people are doing. And then you see what, for instance, an application like a game like Phantom Galaxies does, which is a AAA game. And what they did was they literally dropped last year, they dropped free NFTs to everyone who would want it and created a community that way. And through the use of the NFT, they could participate in the game, and they learned how to open up a MetaMask, and they were able to play the game and got excited, and that basically acquired like 500,000 users. So I think that there's multiple ways of doing it. I think the beauty about blockchain, particularly Web3 gaming, is that it's not really been fully defined yet. And in a way, I don't think it will be, because there's so many new creative ways in which you can attract customers. And again, because of this principle of ownership, you have creative ways in which you can do so. For instance, one way to onboard people is the guilds. They're the ones who are educating, they're the ones who own the assets, and they're the ones who are bringing gamers on board. That's one of the reasons we were supporting so many guilds in the early days as well. So there's multiple ways of doing it. I don't think we've found the best way, but through all of the investments we've done and through all the different wallets and support that we see, I think we believe we're on our pathway to onboard the next hundreds of millions of users.
Amazing. So this is such an exciting time, and we'll see what happens in the coming years.
Sure.
I'm conscious of time because you have your panel soon.
Yes.
But is there any closing comments of where you see the future of Animoca?
Well, I mean, for Animoca, we're continuing to build. Obviously, the current market circumstances are interesting to say the least. But from our perspective, we just opened an office in London. We had the opening party yesterday. We remain committed to the space. And I think what you'll see from us is more in the building side. This is, as unfortunate as it is, a blip in the cycle. When we consider where things were back in 2018, 2019, this is not as bad as it was then. When you're just at Token 2049, the excitement that people have in building, despite everything that's going on, there's probably shock, but the conversation isn't like, what am I doing here? The conversation is, oh, this is bad, but you know what, let's keep building, right? And the resilience, I think, is what's so impressive, that the people who are in this space, especially during this time, these are the true builders, we think. And these are the people who actually really believe in this and that number is growing every day. And one other thing that happened so far in Web3 gaming alone, not including other categories, over $3 billion was invested in that space in this year alone. So while things are tough, if you have investors pouring that kind of capital in support of this new industry, then there's many other industries that are struggling far more. So I think everyone here ought to be grateful for this opportunity, and also because they are in the right field and right industry. We do think that Web3, and particularly Web3 gaming, is the future.
Absolutely, that's why we're all here.
That's right. Yes.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to give us a like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much, Yat, and I'll see you next time. Bye.